When I first met Ted Bundy, he was just a young man working beside me at a crisis hotline in Seattle. He was smart, he was charming, and he seemed to genuinely care about the people we were trying to help. He would talk about his future, his plans for law school, and his political ambitions. There was absolutely nothing in his demeanor, his words, or his actions that would ever suggest the terrible darkness that lurked just beneath the surface. He was the kind of person you would trust, the kind of person you would want as a friend. This is the most chilling part of his story, that evil does not always wear a monstrous face. Sometimes it wears the face of someone you know. The name Ted Bundy is now synonymous with the very definition of a serial killer, a term that became common partly because of him. He stands as a haunting figure in the annals of American crime, a man who committed unspeakable acts of violence against at least 30 young women during the 1970s. But his notoriety comes not just from the brutality of his crimes, but from the stark and terrifying contrast between his public persona and his private deeds. He was handsome, well-spoken, and educated, defying the stereotypical image of a killer lurking in the shadows. He was the man next door, the helpful stranger, the bright law student with a promising future. This duality is what makes his case so compelling and so deeply disturbing to this day. How could a man who seemed so normal, so full of potential, be capable of such profound evil? This question has fascinated criminologists, psychologists, and the public for decades. Bundy forced society to confront an uncomfortable truth, that monsters are not always easily identifiable. They can walk among us, hidden in plain sight, their true nature concealed behind a carefully constructed facade of normalcy. His story serves as a permanent, chilling reminder that the capacity for terrible things can reside in the most unexpected of individuals. Understanding Ted Bundy is not about glorifying a killer. It is about trying to comprehend the incomprehensible. It is an exploration into the nature of psychopathy, the mechanisms of deception, and the societal vulnerabilities that he so expertly exploited. His crimes left an indelible scar on the communities he terrorized and forever changed the way law enforcement profiled and pursued such predators. The man I knew, the friend I thought I had, was an illusion. The real Ted Bundy was a predator of the highest order, and his story is a cautionary tale that continues to echo through the generations, a somber lesson written in the blood of his innocent victims. Theodore Robert Cowell was born on November 24, 1946, in Burlington, Vermont, to a young, unmarried woman named Eleanor Louise Cowell. The circumstances of his birth were shrouded in shame and secrecy, a common burden in that era. To avoid the social stigma of an illegitimate child, his grandparents, Samuel and Eleanor Cowell, decided to raise him as their own son. They told everyone, including young Ted, that his mother was his older sister. This fundamental lie about his identity formed the very foundation of his childhood, creating a confusing and unstable reality for a boy trying to find his place in the world. He was a child living within a family secret, a secret that would inevitably unravel. Growing up in Philadelphia with his grandparents, Ted's early life was marked by strange and unsettling undercurrents. His grandfather, Samuel Cowell, was described by relatives as a tyrannical, bigoted, and violent man who was abusive to his wife, his children, and even the family pets. Young Ted was reportedly a solitary child, shy and socially awkward, who struggled to form meaningful connections with his peers. While some accounts paint him as a normal boy, others recall a darker side. There were whispers of disturbing behavior, an early fascination with knives, and a tendency to peer into neighbors' windows late at night, early signs of a voyeuristic and intrusive nature that would later escalate. When Ted was 4 years old, his mother, whom he still believed to be his sister, moved them across the country to Tacoma, Washington, to start a new life. It was there that she met and married a hospital cook named Johnny Culpepper Bundy, who adopted Ted and gave him the surname he would make infamous. Despite this attempt at creating a stable, conventional family unit, Ted never truly bonded with his stepfather. He reportedly resented Johnny for his modest background and lack of ambition, viewing him as an inadequate father figure. The discovery of his true parentage, which he uncovered during his teenage years, only deepened his sense of alienation and resentment. This fractured upbringing, built on a lie and peppered with dysfunction, is often examined for clues to the monster he would become. Did the secret of his birth plant a seed of rage and confusion? Did his grandfather's abusive behavior provide a blueprint for violence? Or was he simply born with a fundamental lack of empathy, a broken part of his mind that no amount of love or stability could ever have fixed? These questions remain at the heart of the Bundy mystery. While his early life was far from perfect, Many people endure difficult childhoods without becoming predators. For Ted, however, these formative years seemed to forge a path toward a dark and violent destiny. One of the most terrifying aspects of Ted Bundy was his remarkable ability to project an image of complete normalcy and charm. He was not a disheveled outcast who immediately set off alarm bells. On the contrary, he was handsome, articulate, and carried himself with an air of confidence that people found appealing. He dressed well, drove a clean Volkswagen Beetle, and was a student of psychology at the University of Washington before moving on to law school in Utah. This outward appearance was his greatest weapon. It was a meticulously crafted disguise, a mask of sanity that allowed him to get close to his victims without arousing suspicion or fear. He used this charm as a tool of his trade, a lure to draw his prey into a trap. In his public life, he was actively involved in politics, working on the re-election campaign for Washington Governor Daniel J. Evans. He was seen as a bright, promising, and dedicated young Republican. At the crisis clinic where I worked with him, he was praised for his calm and empathetic handling of callers in distress, offering them comfort and advice. People who knew him during this time remember a charismatic and intelligent man who seemed destined for success. This stark contrast between his public self and his secret life of depravity is what made him so uniquely dangerous. This facade was not just for the public, it was so convincing that even those closest to him were deceived for years. His long-term girlfriend, Elizabeth Klopfer, had her suspicions. She noticed strange items in his possession, crutches, plaster of Paris, a meat cleaver, and was disturbed by his mysterious disappearances that coincided with news reports of missing women. She even reported her concerns to the police on more than one occasion. But her image of Ted, the loving and intelligent man she knew, clashed so violently with the idea of a brutal killer that she, and the police initially, could not fully reconcile the two. He was a master manipulator, able to explain away any inconsistency with a plausible story. Bundy's ability to compartmentalize his life was nothing short of extraordinary. He could move seamlessly between his world of brutal fantasy and murder and his everyday existence as a student, boyfriend, and colleague. He could attend law classes during the day and then hunt for victims at night, showing no outward signs of the horrors he was committing. This psychological partition allowed him to maintain his composure, to look someone in the eye and lie without a flicker of guilt or anxiety. It was this chillingly effective performance of normality that enabled him to operate for so long, leaving a trail of devastation while hiding in plain sight. Ted Bundy was a creature of habit, and his crimes followed a disturbingly consistent pattern. He almost exclusively targeted young, attractive college-aged women with long dark hair, often parted in the middle. This specific victim type has led many experts to believe he was hunting for women who resembled a former girlfriend who had broken up with him, a rejection that may have fueled his deep-seated rage. He was a meticulous planner, stalking college campuses, libraries, and public places where he could observe and select his victims with care. He was not an impulsive killer, he was a patient predator who enjoyed the process of the hunt as much as the act of violence itself. His primary method of approach was deception, preying on the kindness and trust of strangers. He frequently employed a ruse, faking an injury to elicit sympathy and assistance. He would wear a cast on his arm or leg or use crutches, and then ask a young woman for help carrying books or loading something into his tan Volkswagen Beetle. This simple trick disarmed his victims, transforming him from a potential threat into a person in need of help. Once they were near his car, often leaning in to assist him, he would strike. He would bludgeon them with a crowbar or another heavy object, rendering them unconscious before forcing them into his vehicle and driving away to a secluded location. Once he had his victims in a remote area, the true horror of his crimes would unfold. He subjected them to brutal sexual assault and murder, often through strangulation. His cruelty did not end with their deaths. Bundy was a necrophile, meaning he would engage in sexual acts with the bodies of his victims long after they were deceased. He would often revisit the dump sites where he had left their remains, sometimes for weeks or even months, to continue his macabre rituals. He also took souvenirs, keeping personal items and even the severed heads of some of his victims at his apartment, trophies that allowed him to relive the power and control he felt during the murders. This grotesque methodology reveals a mind consumed by fantasies of power, possession, and ultimate control over another human being. He did not just want to kill, he wanted to own his victims completely, to erase their identity and reduce them to mere objects for his gratification. The level of planning, the specific victim selection, the use of a sympathy ploy, and the post-mortem rituals all point to a highly organized and deeply disturbed psychopath. His methods were chillingly effective, allowing him to abduct and murder numerous women across multiple states, before law enforcement even realized they were dealing with a single traveling killer. The reign of terror began in the Pacific Northwest, a region that, honestly, felt safe and insular at the time. Starting in early 1974, young women began to disappear from Washington and Oregon at an alarming rate. Linda Ann Healy, a student at the University of Washington, vanished from her basement bedroom in February. In the months that followed, more women disappeared. Donna Manson from Evergreen State College, Susan Rancourt from Central Washington State College, and, well, others too. The disappearances were baffling. They were happening in broad daylight, right from busy college campuses, with no witnesses and no signs of a struggle. A sense of fear began to creep across the region as parents worried for their daughters and police struggled to find any connection between the cases. The turning point that made it clear a serial killer was at work came on a sunny afternoon in July 1974 at Lake Sammamish State Park, a popular recreation spot near Seattle. On that day, two young women, Janice Ott and Denise Naslund, disappeared within hours of each other. Witnesses later came forward with a crucial piece of information. They described a handsome young man with his arm in a sling, who called himself Ted, asking for help loading a sailboat onto his tan Volkswagen Beetle. The man had approached multiple women that day, but Ott and Naslund were the ones who went with him and were never seen alive again. This was the first time a name and a clear method were linked to the abductions. After terrorizing the Pacific Northwest, Bundy moved to Salt Lake City, Utah in the fall of 1974 to attend law school. The pattern of disappearances followed him. Young women in Utah and neighboring Colorado began to vanish under similar circumstances. Nancy Wilcox, Melissa Smith, and Laura Amy were among those who disappeared in Utah, while Karen Campbell was abducted from a ski resort in Aspen, Colorado. Bundy had become a mobile predator, using his studies as a cover to travel and hunt in new territories. The police in different states were investigating their own missing persons cases, completely unaware that the crimes were all connected and perpetrated by the same man. The scope of his crimes was vast and terrifying, stretching from coast to coast. After his first escape from custody in Colorado, his rampage culminated in a final, frenzied attack in Florida in January 1978. In a single night, he broke into the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University, brutally attacking 4 women and killing 2 of them, Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy. Just blocks away, he attacked another student, Cheryl Thomas, in her apartment. A few weeks later, he abducted and murdered his youngest known victim, 12-year-old Kimberly Leach. This cross-country trail of terror left communities shattered and demonstrated a level of audacity that, honestly, few serial killers have ever matched. The investigation into the string of disappearances in the Pacific Northwest was, honestly, a frustrating and fragmented effort at first. Back in the 1970s, law enforcement agencies from different counties and states just didn't communicate as effectively as they do now. There were no national DNA databases or sophisticated computer systems to link crimes across jurisdictions. So each police department was working on its own piece of a much larger puzzle, not realizing there was a broader pattern. Detectives in Washington were chasing leads on their missing women, while authorities in Oregon were doing the same thing, with little realization that a single predator was behind the growing list of victims. The first major breakthrough came from the testimonies at Lake Sammamish State Park. The description of the handsome man named Ted with his arm in a sling and his tan Volkswagen Beetle gave investigators their first solid leads. When Elizabeth Klopfer, Bundy's girlfriend, heard these details, her long-held suspicions crystallized into a horrifying certainty. She called the police and told them about a man named Ted Bundy, who matched the description and drove that exact car. It was a crucial tip, one of several she made. But at the time, police were just overwhelmed with thousands of leads, and Bundy, with his clean record and respectable appearance, did not seem like a prime suspect. The net began to tighten around Bundy in August 1975, but not for murder. A Utah Highway Patrol officer stopped him for suspicious driving in a Salt Lake City suburb. A search of his Volkswagen revealed a ski mask, a crowbar, rope, and handcuffs, a veritable kidnapping kit. This arrest was for evading an officer, but it put him firmly on the radar of Utah police. Soon after, Carol Duranch, a young woman who had survived an abduction attempt in Murray, Utah, identified Bundy in a police lineup as the man who had impersonated a police officer and tried to kidnap her. This positive identification was the first concrete evidence linking him directly to one of the attacks. Even with this progress, linking Bundy to the murders remained a monumental challenge. The evidence was largely circumstantial. Investigators from multiple states began to share information, slowly piecing together the timeline of his movements and comparing it to the dates of the disappearances. Forensic science at the time was limited, but investigators found a key piece of evidence in his car. Hairs that were microscopically matched to Karen Campbell, the victim from Colorado, and later to Melissa Smith from Utah. It was this painstaking police work, the connecting of disparate dots across state lines, that finally began to build a strong enough case to bring the elusive ghost to justice for his heinous crimes. Ted Bundy's first trial took place in Utah in 1976 for the aggravated kidnapping of Carol Duranch. He actually waived his right to a jury, choosing to have his fate decided by a judge instead, maybe thinking his intelligence and charm could sway a single person. Throughout the proceedings, he appeared calm and confident, acting as if the entire situation was just a misunderstanding. However, Carol Duranch's powerful and credible testimony, detailing how she fought her way out of his car, was absolutely damning. The judge found him guilty and sentenced him to 1 to 15 years in the Utah State Prison. This was the first time Bundy's mask had been officially torn away, revealing the criminal beneath. While incarcerated in Utah, he was charged with the murder of Karen Campbell in Colorado. In 1977, he was extradited to Aspen, Colorado to stand trial. Confident in his own abilities, he decided to act as his own lawyer, which granted him access to the courthouse law library, and freedom from wearing handcuffs or leg shackles. He exploited this privilege to stage a daring escape. During a recess, he jumped from a second-story window of the library and fled into the mountains. He was on the run for 6 days before being recaptured, looking disheveled and hungry. This escape only reinforced the public's perception of him as a cunning and dangerous man who would stop at nothing to avoid justice. His second escape, though, was far more elaborate and had catastrophic consequences. On December 30, 1977, he escaped from the Garfield County Jail in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, by sawing a hole in the ceiling of his cell and crawling through the crawl space. By the time his absence was discovered the next morning, he was long gone, heading east towards Florida. It was during this period of freedom that he committed his most savage and brutal attacks at the Chi Omega sorority house and the murder of young Kimberly Leach. He was finally arrested for good in Pensacola, Florida, in February 1978, after being stopped in a stolen car. The hunt was finally over. Bundy's trial in Florida for the Chi Omega murders was a media sensation, honestly, one of the first to be nationally televised. Again, he chose to play a role in his own defense, cross-examining witnesses and grandstanding for the cameras. He was arrogant and theatrical, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. The most powerful piece of forensic evidence was a bite mark left on the body of victim Lisa Levy, which forensic odontologists matched directly to Bundy's distinctively crooked teeth. The jury found him guilty, and the judge, Edward D. Cowart, sentenced him to death, famously telling him, "You'd have made a good lawyer and I would have loved to have you practice in front of me, but you went another way, partner." Delving into the mind of Ted Bundy is, well, like peering into a dark and twisted abyss. He was the archetypal psychopath, a term used to describe individuals who lack empathy, remorse, and a conscience. He was simply incapable of feeling guilt for the horrific pain he inflicted upon his victims and their families. To him, other people were not human beings with feelings and lives of their own. They were just objects, props to be used and discarded for the fulfillment of his violent and consuming fantasies. This profound emotional void was the engine that drove his predatory behavior, allowing him to commit acts of unspeakable cruelty without a moment's hesitation or regret. Experts who studied him, like FBI profiler Robert Keppel and psychologist Dr. Dorothy Lewis, noted his extreme narcissism and sense of grandiosity. Bundy believed he was superior to everyone else, smarter, more cunning, and entitled to do whatever he pleased. This inflated self-image fueled his decision to represent himself in court, and his belief that he could outsmart the entire legal system. He saw his crimes not as evil acts, but as accomplishments, proof of his power and dominance. He spoke of his murders in a detached, third-person narrative, as if describing the actions of a character in a story rather than his own gruesome deeds. A central element of his psychology was the role of violent fantasy. In his final interviews before his execution, Bundy confessed that his journey into murder began with a deep immersion in violent pornography and true crime magazines during his teenage years. These materials fed his dark imagination, and over time his fantasies grew more elaborate and demanding. He began to blur the line between fantasy and reality, eventually feeling compelled to act out the violent scenarios he had rehearsed in his mind for so many years. He described a powerful, destructive force, an entity within him that drove him to kill, though many experts see this as a self-serving attempt to abdicate responsibility for his choices. Ultimately, Bundy remains a psychological enigma because he defies easy explanation. Was he a product of a troubled childhood, or was he born with a malformed brain? While his upbringing was certainly dysfunctional, it does not fully account for the depth of his depravity. He was intelligent and knew right from wrong, he simply did not care. He chose to nurture the darkness within him, to cultivate his violent urges until they consumed him completely. He represents a chilling case study in the nature of pure psychopathy, a stark reminder that some individuals are fundamentally different, operating on a moral plane that is alien to the rest of humanity. The crimes of Ted Bundy left a deep and lasting scar on American society, forever changing the nation's sense of safety and trust. Before Bundy, there was a kind of prevailing innocence, a belief that a friendly face could be taken at face value. He shattered that illusion. He taught the world a terrifying lesson, that evil could be handsome, articulate, and highly intelligent. The fear he instilled was profound, especially among young women. The simple act of a stranger asking for help was no longer seen as an innocent request, but as a potential trap. His legacy is a loss of innocence, and the birth of a healthy, if unfortunate, skepticism toward strangers. In the world of law enforcement and criminology, Bundy's case was a watershed moment. His ability to cross state lines and kill with impunity highlighted the critical need for better communication and data sharing between different police jurisdictions. His crime spree helped spur the development of centralized databases for violent crimes, leading to the creation of the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, VICAP, in the 1980s. The extensive investigation into his methods also helped refine the science of criminal profiling. FBI agents who interviewed Bundy, like Bill Hagmaier and Robert Ressler, gained invaluable insights into the mind of a serial killer, knowledge that has since been used to track and capture countless other predators. Bundy's story also had a significant impact on the legal system and the media. His televised Florida trial was a landmark event, bringing the grim reality of a capital murder case into the living rooms of millions of Americans. It turned the trial into a public spectacle and cemented Bundy's status as a morbid celebrity. Furthermore, his case brought forensic sciences, particularly forensic odontology, the study of bite marks, into the public spotlight. The bite mark evidence used to convict him in the Chi Omega case, while now considered a more controversial science, was seen at the time as a powerful and innovative tool for securing a conviction against a cunning killer. More than 3 decades after his execution in the Florida electric chair on January 24, 1989, the fascination with Ted Bundy endures. His story is retold in books, documentaries, and films, not to glorify him, but to try and understand the darkness he represents. He serves as the ultimate cautionary tale, a human embodiment of the monster that hides behind a normal face. Understanding his story matters because it forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of evil, the importance of vigilance, and the vulnerabilities in our society that predators are all too eager to exploit. The shadow of Ted Bundy lingers as a permanent reminder that we must never forget the victims, and we must always remain watchful for the stranger beside us.